And if you would raise your right hand, sir. You swear affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Go ahead and have a seat in the witness stand. Ms. Gratiano.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you please state your name again for the record and spell your last name as well?
It's Lieutenant John Sarkisian. Last name is Sarkisian.
And Lieutenant, where are you currently employed?
At the El Paso County Sheriff's Office over the Patrol Division.
And how long have you been with the Sheriff's Office?
It'll be 22 years in September.
And over the course of your time at the Sheriff's Office, have you had many roles, different roles?
I have. I've been many different units, patrol, detentions. I was the homicide or major crimes sergeant for approximately 2.5 years. Been in Metro Vice Narcotics, been over the SWAT team. So I've been many areas of the office.
Worn different hats.
Yes.
In January and February of 2020, what was your specific assignment?
So I was assigned to the Special Operations Division, which is over our SWAT team, as the SWAT commander. And I also had our traffic unit and some other smaller units.
And as it relates to the Special Operations section, as it relates specifically to the investigation of the disappearance of Gannon Stauch at that time in February and January of 2020, what was your specific role?
So I was assigned as basically the incident commander for the search efforts. I was called to a meeting and basically assigned in an incident command system. The way it's set up, we have operational chiefs and different positions to run different aspects of investigations. So I was assigned for the search efforts.
And was that something that you had done previously in other cases?
I mean, not to this degree, but definitely have been involved with incident command throughout my career in the different roles that I've played. So that was a big piece of the SWAT team in running SWAT calls. So we have to be able to, manage all those resources. So I think that's why they selected me for it.
And can you explain to the jury a little bit more what incident command means? What is that?
It's basically a system that is put together so everybody knows what they're doing, where they should be, how they should operate. So it's broke out into different branches, so to say, law enforcement, fire, financial. Obviously, when we're searching to the magnitude we did in this case, we have a lot of people. So food plays in, gas, different resources. So it's a whole system put together. It looks like a tree that's broke out into everybody's role. So when you come in for the day, you know what you're doing.
And you're overseeing that tree?
Correct.
Okay. And now you mentioned the scope of the resources. Is that something that you personally, while you work with the Sheriff's Office, have you ever seen something on this scale before?
I haven't.
Okay. And in terms of what was known to you and other members of law enforcement in January and February of 2020, had the location of Gannon Stauch been identified yet?
It had not.
Okay. You mentioned many, many resources. Can you give the jury an idea of which agencies came in to help and assist you?
So the two major ones would have been search and rescue, and then the National Guard came in. The National Guard was able to provide a lot of volunteers, a lot of different people that were able to help out with the search. And then search and rescue was also the other big one. They pulled people from wherever they could from different search and rescue units to come in and help. We also had different agencies. I know you'll probably get into it, but when we moved up north, we had Douglas County that helped out. We had some volunteers that wanted to fly drones for us. We had a lot of civilians reaching out to want to help, and we kind of avoided that to a certain degree, but depending on what the volunteer looked like, we could have other people help with that too. Different police agencies, wherever we were going, it just depended. I mean, it was an outpouring of people that were ready and willing to come out and search.
And, on particular days, did the number of people that were actually in charge of supervising and coordinating search efforts, how did that vary?
It depended on, in the beginning, there was a lot, so to say. And to answer your question, I would say anywhere between, I mean, it could be 20 or 30 people helping to hundreds. So it just depended on the area, the time frame, and the availability of people. We were trying every day to get as many people as possible because it's just easier to cover the area we were searching.
Now, in terms of your initial efforts in organizing the very massive search, end of January of 2020, where were the search efforts as you were supervising them? Where were they focused? What part of the city?
So we started in that Lorson Ranch area, which was down south. Um, we kind of started from the residence and moved north from there. So as the command over the search efforts, I had a liaison in the detectives division, and which was another lieutenant. So he was, I didn't have a lot of case detail. He was just providing me areas to focus searching. So he would call and say, "Hey, we have this little bit, or we have this little piece of information. We need to search in this specific area," and then we would identify zones in that area, and then organize people and how we were going to move through those areas and cover that. So we started in the Lorson Ranch area. We moved north of there, up towards Bradley Road, and some of that area through there. Then we also moved across over by Fountain Creek for a little bit. We ended up going up to Perry Park. We did a little bit off of Highway 105. So there was several different areas that we searched.
Now, you mentioned off Highway 105. Are you generally familiar with that area?
I am.
Okay. And can you give the jury a frame of reference as to when the search efforts you were coordinating were focused in that particular area?
Just for clarification, you talking about the Perry Park or Highway 105?
Well, we'll take them separately. Either one. We can start with the Perry Park Road.
So yeah, Perry Park, I believe, was around, I think it was February 12th to about February 20th. We were up in that area. We spent several days up through there.
Okay. And the Highway 105 area?
I don't know the specifics on the date of that one. It was somewhere mixed in, I feel mixed in the middle of that. That was a shorter stay over there just because we had some information to just check some real specific places off the road.
Okay.
So we didn't spend a lot of time in the 105 area, maybe
Now-
like a day or two.
Okay. In terms of, can you give the jury an idea of the general state of, what the topography there? I mean, what is it heavily wooded? What is the area that looks, we're talking about the South Perry Park Road area. What does that look like?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar, as you head up out of Palmer Lake, it's kind of open fields. There's a very specific S turn that comes out of town. And once you hit the first S curve and you start up, it becomes to be very heavily wooded, so to say, brush, big pine trees. And then you move, the road turns back to the right to head north. And there's also a lot of trees and some fields, but you're right up against the mountains at that point. So it's pretty heavy cover.
Now, you mentioned various tools and resources that were of use, but specifically in that area, what kind of tools and resources were really essential for you guys?
So when we were first sent up to that area, when I drove it to go kind of get an idea of where to put the command post and how we're going to separate it into zones, I noticed there was a significant amount of snow still. So there was several drifts. It's, right up against the mountains, like I said. So drifts, heavy snow, different, a lot of different elements to that. So search and rescue, when we brought them in, one major thing they used was what they called probing poles, which they actually had to find more because they tend to break or they lose them or whatever. But it's basically just a long pole that they can stick down in the snow and probe for what they're feeling. They've been doing this long enough that they were telling me they can, if they hit dirt, they can feel that. If they hit something soft that doesn't feel like the ground should, then they'll stop, and then they'll, dig the snow out, clear that area, search more specifically for what's under the snow there. Once they identify it, then they can move on and continue to do that. So obviously shovels, tools, specific tool wise, you mean like,
Well, how about the use of canines, for example?
okay. So resource wise, yeah, we did have a volunteer that flew a drone over that area. We had, they brought the canines in. So I think FBI had a couple of their dogs running through there. So there was a lot of, trying to think who else we had or what else we were using up there. Drones and,
What about overhead planes?
um, so in the Lorson Ranch area, when we were searching down there, we had, and I believe it was National Guard, they were able to fly a plane uh, over the area and give us some aerial images. So,
Okay. And you mentioned information known to law enforcement. Can you explain why some of the search efforts were focused specifically in that South Perry Park Road area?
hold on one second for me, okay?
Mm.
Sorry. Apologize.
That's all right.
Can you ask that question again?
Yeah. You mentioned an S-turn at South Perry Park Road area. What was the information that law enforcement was receiving or received? But how do you focus in that particular area?
So, like I said, I had a liaison through the detectives division. He had provided some information that a tracker information had shown a vehicle that traveled up through that area and then had specifically slowed down in a certain section and then moved. And then I think it had come back through. But the information provided to me was that the, vehicle was up in that area.
And the specific vehicle that you're referring to, do you remember the make, model, year, anything like that?
I don't. I recall him telling me that it was Leticia's vehicle that was that they had tracked up through that area, and that's why they were moving us up there.
Okay. And in terms of, you mentioned the law enforcement resources in terms of tracking that vehicle, did that include members of surveillance, MBNI, that sort of information provided them to you?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
I don't know if they actually. I wasn't privy to that information, whether or not they had followed a vehicle or not.
Okay. On February 15th of 2020, were you on duty that day?
I was.
Okay. And did you find anything in particular of note on that day?
I did. So on February 15th, I mean, like I said, we'd been working several days in a row, doing a lot of search efforts. On that day, go ahead.
And sorry to cut you off, but we'll go through, I'll introduce a few exhibits through you, but before we get there, to start, what was the particular item that you located?
So I located a piece of particle board that was approximately 2 feet by 2.5 feet and 1/2 inch thick that was off the side of the road.
Okay.
Okay.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness?
You may.
Thank you. Lieutenant, I'm showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 326 for the record. Do you recognize it?
I do.
How do you recognize it?
That is the upper turn of the S turn of the search area.
Okay. And you mentioned that you found a board.
Correct.
There's a label that appears on this map. Does that label mean anything to you?
Yeah, that would be accurate to the location where I found it.
And is People's Exhibit 326 a fair and accurate representation of that area and where you located that board?
It is.
Your Honor, permission to admit People's 326 for the record.
Exhibit 326 will be admitted. And before we go further in, just about something that we discussed earlier, the jury should also know that Exhibit 279 is also admitted by stipulation. It is a CD disc, I assume is on the table there. It's a CD disc of USAA financial transactions. And so that's also evidence that you may consider during this case. Ms. Gratiano?
Thank you, Your Honor. Lieutenant Sarkeesian, can you point out for the jury the particular area? I know that the label is clear, but if you wouldn't mind standing up and just going through the area and pointing out a few things on the map for me.
Okay.
So you mentioned an S turn. Can you explain to the jury in part, kind of what you mean by that?
So if this map continued, the road curves back this way. It goes towards Palm Lake. So as you come up here, this would be the upper turn, and then it's heading north out of town that way.
Okay. And you mentioned coordinating search efforts. Can you give the jury a frame of reference on People's Exhibit 326, where you were coordinating all those efforts from, if we can see it on that map?
So we basically made this into zones. This is kind of where the treat area would start. This was also heavy snow cover because of the side of the road. So we made this into zones, basically, or I made it into zones that came up through here, across up the road, and then up into about this area up here. So this was pretty much our zone. That map is a pretty good representation of our zoned out areas.
Okay. And as you're coordinating search efforts, are you doing that in some sort of methodical way so you
Absolutely.
understand where efforts are being done and over time? Can you explain that to the jury as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can picture this as being at zone A, we'll say, we had search and rescue, National Guard, whoever was helping us, basically start on one end of the zone. They had to use the poles a lot because of the snow, and they basically just moved as a group up here, within feet of each other, and just searching that whole area as they moved. And once they would complete a zone, if they got up to this road and that was the end of the zone, then they would report that back through the chain, which would come to me that we've completed this zone.
Okay. And we talked about February 15th of 2020 when you found the board. Can you give the jury a walkthrough of generally the snow levels in that area? It's Colorado, but what were the snow levels around there on that day?
On that day, so we had a variation up there. Some days it would be snowing, some days it would be sunny. So we had some melt off and we had some snow. It was generally a mix of some thawed out areas, some a little bit thicker areas, some dirt. So it was kind of just all over as far as snow cover, sporadic.
All right. And so when the sun comes out in Colorado, what happens to the snow?
Absolutely.
Right.
It was melting in certain areas.
Okay. So fair to say a day or two before, would the snow levels in that area have been different?
Absolutely. Yeah. We had a couple heavy snow days where it actually came in and we were trying to beat the snow to cover some of the zones. And then snow, we'd have to, tailor that to the search. So,
Okay, great.
because the coldness played into, then we had a bunch of people out in the cold. So,
Right. And you can take a seat now. Thank you, sir. Your Honor, permission to approach the witness?
You may.
Lieutenant, I'm showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibits 327 through 331.
Okay.
Do you recognize those?
I do.
How do you recognize them?
These are all pictures taken from the search area during that time period.
Okay. And are they a fair and accurate depiction of the search efforts on February 15th of 2020?
They are.
Your Honor, at this time we would move for the admission of People's Exhibits 327 through 331.
No objection. Exhibits 327 through 331 will be admitted.
And Your Honor, permission to publish as well?
You may go ahead.
Thank you. Lieutenant, you mentioned the snow. So I'll ask you to walk the jury through what we see projected behind you, People's Exhibit 327. Can you orient the jury as to where we're at on the map in front of you? Where is this photo?
So as this photo is taken, it's taken from here on this map. So it's actually pointing up at the S curve as you come around it.
And there's also a pointer, it's an old school pointer that may be on the witness stand. You'll have to extend it. If you'd like to use that,
Okay.
you can. There are a number of cars that we see on the road there. Are those some of the people that are helping out the search effort?
Correct. Search and rescue and or National Guard.
Okay. On the passenger side area of those cars, there appears to be a large, large white area next to those cars. What is that?
Are you looking at this right here?
Yes.
So this is a berm that is just built up from the road right there. I don't know if it used to have a pond behind it or what, but it's just maybe a 7 or 8 foot berm.
Okay. And as you're out there for search efforts on February 15th of 2020, can you walk the jury through what were things that were of note for you? Maybe in People's Exhibit 328, what are we seeing in this particular photo that may be helpful for you to explain?
Okay.
Oh.
So just for clarification, do you want as far as the board goes or?
And just
Yes.
explaining your efforts that day as it led to you finding the board.
Okay. So on this particular day, obviously with these vehicles lined up here, we had searchers in our zone, which on this map over here would have been up through this area would have been the zone that they were in. On that particular day, on the 15th, I had been in the command post for several days, and so I grabbed one of the search and rescue guys that was one of the head guys for the operation and said, "Hey, let's jump in the Razor," which you saw in the other picture. Can you actually go back one picture?
Yeah, no problem.
So this guy that's parked right here is what we ended up taking from the command post, which was significantly north of this location. I said, "Hey, let's just get out and go check on the searchers, see how it's going out there in the zone." As we were getting out there, we were notified that one of the dogs had alerted on a area, which from this picture would be basically behind this berm. There's a gate you can't really see, like a barbed wire fence. So up behind the berm there, the dog had alerted. So we were out there like, well, let's go check on the dog. We walked up there. They were doing some digging and some searching around the dog. Nothing that we really found as significant there. So as I came back on this map here, there's a barbed wire fence that runs along the side of the road. As I came back, I started looking at the fence, and I'd asked some of the guys, "Hey, has anybody checked this fence?" They kind of looked at me funny. I said, you cross a fence, if you're across the barbed wire fence, maybe catch your pants on it, maybe catch your shirt on it. It can, snag threads. It can, catch animal hairs, that type of thing. So I just started walking up that fence from this picture. And if you go to the next picture.
So People's Exhibit 328.
So this is the fence, obviously, that runs along here. So I was walking the fence when I got up to about this area, and generally in this area, I noticed a board sitting on the ground. There was some footprints past it, like other searchers had walked through that area, but it did not appear that the board had been moved. I say that because there was snow on part of the board, and the snow was not cracked, so it's not like someone had moved the board. So
And-
when I saw the board I could see right off had some type of stain or something on it. As I moved closer to look at it, I used a glove I actually had to move it because I didn't know what it was at that point.
And I'll stop you there, sir.
Sorry.
We're going to walk through, that's fine. But I want to show the jury People's Exhibit 329 so that you can use these to explain. So as you approach that area, what are we seeing as People's Exhibit 329?
So this is the barbed wire fence is in the background here. You can see the post. So I was walking up this way. This is the board. This is the stain I'm referring to on the board, and then the snow, how it had caught the corner of it, was still sitting under the snow.
And is this how the board appeared to you when you first spotted it?
It is.
Okay. And so before I cut you off, you were explaining to the jury how you'd seen the edge of the board, and you mentioned a glove. Why did you use a glove?
Well, once I saw the board and saw that stain on the board, knowing we were looking for any items that could be associated to this case, so we had put that out to search and rescue, National Guard to look for any and all items that could be of evidence. So one thing to note for these search efforts we've been doing, we had been checking the sides of roads a lot. So what do you come across a lot on the sides of road? Trash, cans, old gloves, socks. I mean, you name it, we found it. So a lot of the stuff that was found along the sides of the road, you don't know if it's evidence until it's evidence, basically. So if someone found something, we would say if it looked like something that could possibly be evidence, to notify someone from command, and then we'd send out people to collect it.
And in terms of distance between where the road is and where you've now discovered this board, can you give us an approximation?
From the road to the berm, I would estimate 20, 30 feet. This was probably in the middle of that, somewhere 10, 15 feet from the edge of the road to the berm. So it wasn't far off the road. I mean, this is the road right here.
And so that we can just get a frame of reference for distances, when you say the distance between the road and the berm, where are we talking?
So this map might be easier from the edge of this road, and then the berm sits right here, so to say. That other picture might show it a little bit better if you go back.
So for the record, you're pointing on the map on People's Exhibit 326. Now we're looking at 328.
So this would be the berm, obviously edge of the road, fence. So approximately 20, 30 feet, I would say, to the berm. So in the middle of that, in the middle of the two.
And for a frame of reference, when you located the board, is it on the other side of that berm?
No.
Okay.
So it's right in these trees right here,
Okay.
so to say.
So when we look at People's Exhibit 329, we're in that tree area near the base of that, on the ground there?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned seeing a stain. We'll look at People's Exhibit 330. Now at this point, what has now happened with the board?
So at the point that, like I said, I put a glove on to move it, because I couldn't tell exactly. So as I got closer to it, I barely moved it. And from my training experience over the years, as soon as I saw that, I was like, that's blood. So I put it back in the position that it was in. And like I said, I barely moved it, just enough to get that look at it. So I set it back in there and then notified one of the FBI personnel to come photograph and collect it.
And is it because the FBI was there to help coordinate search efforts, but also collection of evidence?
Correct.
Okay. And in terms of collection of that particular piece of evidence, who specifically, the FBI then took it into evidence?
They did.
Okay. Do you recognize People's Exhibit? You've already said you recognize it, but can you give us a frame of reference for what we're looking at now in People's Exhibit 331?
So just a scale to the size of the stain that was on the board.
Okay. Now, when you were there present that day, did you see any other pieces of particle board or wood aside from this?
I did not.
Okay. And what we're seeing in People's Exhibit 331, can you describe the top right corner area of that board?
Yeah, so I mean, this is how the board was when it was collected. So that broken edge, that's how it was.
Okay. Your Honor, permission to approach with what has been marked as People's Exhibit 332.
Go ahead.
Sir, I'm showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 332. Do you recognize it?
I do.
How do you recognize it?
That's the board that I found that day.
And in terms of labeling of this particular item, is that consistent with the item that you recognize?
It is.
And we see some tape on this. What does the tape indicate to you?
So when you seal an evidence item, you seal it with that tape, and you see the initials on there. That's so anyone knows if that if it's been broken. If the tape's been tampered with or broken, the signature across it will be not in place.
And is this in the same or substantially same condition as when you last viewed it and it was collected on February 15th of 2020?
Other than the marks on there, which they obviously did, the pen marks, yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time we'd move for the admission of People's Exhibit 300 and I just want to make sure 332.
No objection.
Exhibit 332 will be admitted. Go
I'm
ahead.
going to ask for your help.
Okay.
Your Honor, may the witness walk the exhibit slowly past the jury for publishing purposes?
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. You're showing that. Lieutenant, after February 15th of 2020, how would you describe the nature of your role as the investigation moved forward in this case?
I still continue to conduct the search efforts. If there was new information coming in from the liaison, I would still coordinate, where we were going, what we were doing. Like I said, I think we continued at least through the 20th. So we still, same thing, zones, getting help, the whole 9 yards for searching.
And in terms of media presence, when search efforts were being focused in this particular area, was media present?
Absolutely. So media was pretty much present through the whole search time and search efforts everywhere we went. It was obvious that we were in the area just from the amount of people, sheriff's office, police cars, canine, search and rescue. So media caught on fairly quickly. We also had our PIO was coordinating efforts to keep them either in an area or informed of what was going on. So we didn't, when it comes to media, other than coming into an active crime scene, we can't keep them out. So as long as they can legally be somewhere, they can set up anywhere. So they would set up outside of our command post on Perry Park Road. They would set up out there and film the command post. They would go down and film searchers searching through the snow or whatever. So there was a lot of media coverage of it.
And just for the jury, various acronyms, but what does PIO mean? What's it stand
Our
for?
public information officer. Sorry.
Okay.
Sheriff's office personnel assigned to inform the media of specific cases.
Okay. Was it a secret that law enforcement and various resources and personnel were in that area at any time?
Absolutely not.
Okay. And the media coverage in this particular area, they were there. Was that being broadcast on the news to the public?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned also Highway 105, that some search efforts there were also done. Was the media present to document that as well?
Yeah, I think I can recall pretty much every day we were searching, media was somewhere. I didn't pay a lot of attention to because I was in the command post, but people would call back in, media on scene, or media's in this area. Do you want them to go somewhere? That was pretty common for most of the search days.
Yeah. In terms of the scope and the number of resources that were used that you oversaw, is that anything that you'd ever seen before while you worked at the sheriff's department for over 20 years?
No, this was the biggest search that I think anyone that I've worked with for 20 years has been a part of.
Thank you. Your Honor, we'll pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
No question, Charlie.
Do any of the jurors have any questions for Lieutenant Sarkisian? All right, looks like we have one. Lieutenant Sarkisian, am I saying that right?
That's closer.
What would be right?
Sarkisian.
Sarkisian, okay, I'm sorry. Lieutenant Sarkisian, was the board on the west side of the barbed wire fence?
Yes, it was.
And was there an opening in the fence?
So, can we go back to pictures?
Tell me which one.
Yeah, let's go back to this one first. So along here, no, this was a barbed wire fence all the way up, and then if you go to the further out picture, right basically behind this white truck, there's a break in the berm, and there was a barbed wire gate. So where the actual board was there was no breaks in the barbed wire fence.
And just for the purposes of the record, Lieutenant Sarkisian is using People's Exhibit 327, and before that, 328.
And were there any footprints collected?
That I don't know as far as, well, let me rephrase that. The footprints in the area were from us searching extensively. So any of those footprints in the snow were from searchers, so to say, if that makes sense. We had, like I said, we had anywhere from 30 to hundreds of people walking through there, going through there. I do not believe that FBI collected any footprints from that area.
All right. I will allow reasonable follow-up as to those questions only. Prosecution?
You mentioned footprints. To be clear, had search efforts, volunteers, other personnel, had they been through that area by the time you saw that board?
They had been. And not only that, I'll add, it had also snowed off and on, like I said, through that whole operational period. So there was new snow on the ground, there was old snow. Obviously, as we walked in the snow, everyone was creating footprints. So.
And in terms of looking for specific items or items of interest, was that information or directive relayed to the people that were helping out in the search?
It was, some specific items were relayed, but in general, like I said earlier, it was any item that would spark your interest. Call someone to come take a look at a little bit closer.
And to be clear, when you approached that particular board, was it clear to you that it had been moved by the snow, or somebody had moved it in the snow?
That someone had moved it in the snow?
Somebody had moved it. What you observed as it relates to the snow on the board?
No, it had not been moved.
All right. Briefly. Go ahead.
So there were actually multiple footprints around that board, correct?
Not around the board, but kind of, if you can imagine, between the berm and where the board was, there's kind of like a pathway, an alleyway, so to say, that's just would be, you're not walking through the trees. So if you were going to walk that area, you would just walk through that opening. There was footprints through that opening.
Okay. And you didn't see who left those footprints?
No idea.
So you're just making the assumption that you believe that they were somebody from the search party?
Well, search, that was the zone we were in. So there were multiple searchers, the canines, they were all in that area, moving through up and down over the, through the berm. I mean, all through that area.
Yeah, but you don't know for certain that none of those footprints were left by the person who left the board.
I don't.
Okay, no further questions.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant. You may step down. Watch your step as you step off of the stand. Prosecution, call your next witness, please.
Call Kevin Clark, Your Honor.
All right. Oh, you surprised me. I was waiting for somebody to come in. If you would raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Go ahead and have a seat in the witness stand. Please watch your step as you step into the stand.
Who's doing it, Kevin? Mr. Clark, remember you testified, I think it might have been last week, although it's kind of blending together. Still under oath, you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you've already been introduced to the jury, so I want to have you just jump into some specifics here. And we'll actually get into some of the stuff about the board in just a moment. But before we get into that, are you familiar with call detail records?
I am, yes.
What are call detail records?
Call detail records are the activity the cell phone had with the cell phone carrier. So AT&T, Verizon in this case, all the calls to and from the device, all the text messages to and from the device, the data sessions to and from the device, or from the device to the network. All those have a date and a time that they occurred, and then phone number one contacting phone number two. And if it's an inbound or outbound, that'll determine if it's your target number or not. And then it has the cell phone tower and its location that service that activity for that phone to be able to make and receive calls, texts, data sessions.
Is it common in investigations for search warrants to be issued to phone companies, like you mentioned, AT&T or Verizon, to obtain call detail records for specific types of phones?
Every time.
How are those records used in an investigation in a general sense?
It places or does not place a device in an area during a time period using the activity from the phone and the towers that service that activity.
So basically for a phone, if it connects to a cell phone tower, does it somehow record, I should say, a location data for that particular contact event?
Yes.
I'm going to approach you with People's Exhibit 704 through 708. I've previously shown these to the defense.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark, if you could just flip through those and then let me know when you're done flipping through those.
I'm done.
So in a general sense, what are these items, discs?
These are disks that contain the call detail records and the Life 360 GPS location data for the cell phones belonging to individuals in this investigation.
Individuals that would be relevant towards this investigation?
Correct.
So for instance, none of these are for detectives or anything like that?
No.
If we talk about People's Exhibit 704, tell the jury what People's Exhibit 704 is.
704 is a disk containing the AT&T call detail records for the defendant's cell phone.
We've heard testimony about two different phones associated with the defendant, one that was seized by law enforcement at the end of Detective Bethel's interview. So I'll call that her Colorado phone. Is that this particular disk?
Yes, this is the Colorado phone.
And then what is People's Exhibit 705?
705 is a disk containing the Life 360 GPS location data for the Colorado phone belonging to the defendant.
And so Life 360, in a general sense, tell the jury what Life 360 is.
Life 360 is an app, which is like a program that you can put on your phone, as well as other phones. It can be friends or family, so you can see where each other phones are in near real time.
And similar to cell phone data, does the Life 360 disk that we have there, does that include that location data for the defendant's phone using that Life 360 app?
It does.
People's Exhibit 706, tell the jury what that one is.
These are the Verizon call detail records for the defendant's phone that was purchased on February 1st at the Trinidad Walmart that traveled to Florida and then to South Carolina.
And was that actually seized in South Carolina by law enforcement?
We never seized this cell phone.
Okay. But how do you then get to the call detail records for that if the phone is never seized?
These are completely independent of actually needing the physical phone. This is all the activity from the cell phone towers. So you don't need to have a physical phone to get this data.
So does that come directly from Verizon as opposed to the physical device?
That's correct.
People's Exhibit 707.
These are the AT&T call detail records for Harley Hunt's cell phone.
And then People's Exhibit 708.
These are the AT&T call detail records for Gannon Stauch's cell phone.
Do each one of those disks that we just talked about, 704 through 708, do those include an affidavit from the provider? So AT&T, Verizon, Life 360, verifying the authenticity of the information contained on those disks?
They do.
At this time, I'd move for admission of people 704 through 708.
Defense.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 704 through 708 will be admitted. Okay.
In preparation for the next bit of testimony, Judge, I'm going to approach with People's Exhibit 694, which is a photo, and retrieve those other disks.
All right.
So, Mr. Clark, we just heard testimony from Lieutenant Sarkeesian regarding that board that was found up at the S-curve. In that general area that we're talking about, which is on the map there, I can't remember, what's the number of that exhibit number? In 326. Is that actually in southern Douglas County where this location is?
It is.
Are you familiar with that area?
I am.
Did you actually go up there and see some of this stuff yourself?
I did. I was up there with another FBI agent the day the board was, and at the time the board was located.
During this investigation, were you present for the vast majority of this investigation
I was.
in this area?
Yes.
Do you remember was there some location data, GPS data that we've already heard some testimony about that showed the GPS tracker that was placed on a vehicle traveling up to this area?
There was.
What date did that occur?
The first time was Tuesday evening, and the second time was Friday night of the week that Gannon went missing.
Okay, so Tuesday evening, would that be January 28th?
Correct.
And then the Friday night is which day?
The 30th.
30th? Okay.
Or, yes.
30th or 31st? I can't.
Friday's the 31st. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, Friday the 31st.
Subsequent to the GPS tracker data going up to this S-curve, do you remember if it snowed heavily after that?
It did.
Okay. And would that account for the drifting snow that we see in those pictures that we just looked at with Lieutenant Sarkeesian?
It would.
Did you have a chance to look at the download of Mr. Al Stauch's phone?
I did.
Did that download include photographs that were taken using that phone?
Yes.
We previously admitted through Mr. Stauch, if we could pull up and republish People's Exhibit number 34. Oh, we just need the screen turned on, Judge.
No.
Thank you. So we've got People's Exhibit 34 up behind you. Are you familiar with this picture?
I am.
Tell us how you're familiar with this particular photo.
When I was examining the download of Al Stauch's cell phone, I came across this photo. And seemingly it's the desk that was next to Gannon's bed in his bedroom underneath the window. But then I also noticed a board on the garage floor.
And so when you came across this photo, were you able to tell when that particular photo was taken?
Yes, there's something called metadata, and metadata is just a term for data about data. And in this case, it has a date and a timestamp of when the photo was taken.
Data about data sounds like a really geeky thing.
It really is, but
Okay.
it's useful, geeky stuff.
Okay. Does that tell you when this particular photo was taken then?
Yes.
When was this photo taken?
Sometime in November, December of 2019, if I recall correctly.
2019 sound correct?
Yes.
Had you, when you came across this photo, when you're looking at Al's download data from his phone, had you already seen the board that was found up at the S-curve,
Yes.
or at least photos of it?
Yes.
Did that, having that knowledge, did that cause you to have a particular interest in this photo?
It did.
What about seeing pictures of the board found at the S-curve made you key in on this specific photo?
The broken corner, the top corner of the board found at the S-curve also had a broken corner, and it also appeared to be consistent of the type of the board, the particle board.
Did you compare the board in this photo to a photo of the board that was found at the S-curve?
I did.
I've handed you People's Exhibit 694. What is 694?
694 is a side-by-side comparison of the board that was found at the S-curve and the board zoomed in seen in this photo taken from Al's phone.
And just to be clear, this particular photo that we see up there, People's Exhibit 34, is that the garage at 6627 Mandan Drive?
It is.
Is the photo 694, that side-by-side comparison, is that a fair and accurate representation of your analysis and placing those two photos side-by-side to look at them in comparison?
It is.
At this time, I'd move for admission of 694.
No objection. Exhibit 694 will be admitted.
Permission to publish.
You may go ahead.
We'll take just a second to scroll down.
Ready.
It's ready. Thank you. Now we got no signal.
Weird.
Is there some data about data, why there's no signal, Mr. Clark?
I'll dig into it, sir.
Okay.
Oh, hold on.
There we go.
There we go. All right.
Crisis averted.
Yep.
If you could use the pointer that's up there to your right, it's already extended, it looks like, and make sure that the jurors can hear you in the far reaches of the jury box. Point out the similarities between the board from the S-curve. Is that on the left side of this photo?
Correct. I took this photograph right here on the left side. This is the board from the S-curve.
In the other photos that we saw of the S-curve, there was that reddish dark stain sort of in the middle that was sort of elongated. Is that on the flip side of this particular photo?
It is.
All right. So the picture taken inside the garage, is that on the right side of this particular comparison photo?
It is.
Point out for the jury the similarities between the two boards.
One of the obvious ones is the broken, in this instance, top left corner of the board, located at the S-curve. And then the one in the photograph. The second one that might be more difficult to see is there's a penciled X on this board. You can see it here on the S-curve board. You can also see the bottom half of it right here in the garage board. And it's in the same location of the board. Additionally, there's some markings that go horizontal on the board in the photograph with the table saw on top, circular saw. And those same markings are seen here on the board that's recovered at the S-curve.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for at this particular time. We will recall him later, Judge.
All right. Mr. Cook, cross-examination.
I just have a couple of questions. Good morning, how are you?
Good morning, Mr. Cook.
Did you take measurements of the board that was collected at the S-curve?
I did not.
Okay, so like width, length, anything like that?
No.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Redirect.
Only very briefly. So mentioning measurements, we could measure the board that was found at the S-curve, correct? Because we actually have that board.
Yes.
The board that's in the photo from the garage with that circular saw sitting on it, would it be easy to get measurements of that, or would it be difficult?
No, you can find the measurements of that
Okay.
saw. Yes.
Okay. Based on your observations of those two boards, does it appear that they are similar in size?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Do any of the jurors have any questions for Mr. Clark on this subject? All right. Thank you, sir. You may step down. Prosecution, call your next witness, please.
Commander Mitch Malhalko. Who's doing Malhalko?
Commander, if you would step forward and raise your right hand, please, sir. Do you swear affirm the testimony about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Go ahead and have a seat in the stand. Please watch your step as you step into the stand.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How are you?
Well,
Good. Will you please introduce yourself to the jury and then spell your first and last name for our court reporter?
you bet. My name is Mitch Mahalko. Good morning. I'm a commander with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. My last name is spelled Mihalko. First name Mitch, Mitch.
Thank you, Mr. Malhalko. You said that you're a commander with the Sheriff's Office. How long have you been in that particular role?
Since 2021,
How long have you worked at the Sheriff's Office in total?
20 years.
Describe for the jury your various responsibilities through your career with the Sheriff's Office.
Sure. I've been both on the detentions and law enforcement side. I've been a law enforcement officer on the law enforcement side since 2006. Worked both as a street cop, as a deputy, as a supervisor over both patrol and detectives. I was a detective for about nearly 7 years. And then from there, I had moved through the ranks to include being a manager level or lieutenant, and was recently promoted to commander in 2021.
When you were a detective, what units were you assigned to in that role?
So in the role as a detective, I was assigned to financial crimes and organized crime, and then also sex crimes or SVU.
What kind of education do you have that allows you to do the job you do?
So actually, I have an associate's of applied science degree in criminal justice. I also hold a bachelor's degree in emergency services administration.
What about post-certification? So police officer standards and training certification.
Yes, in 2003, I completed my post-certification as well.
Meaning that you're a certified law enforcement officer in the state of Colorado?
Yes,
It's been a while.
yes.
Yeah. What was your assignment back in January of 2020?
January of 2020, I was a lieutenant overseeing the violent crime section of the investigations division.
What is the violent crime section of the investigations division?
Mainly person crimes. So everything from homicide, sex assault, missing persons, cold case, and assaults.
What is the jurisdiction of the sheriff's office? It may be obvious, but let's talk about that just
Sure.
briefly.
Jurisdiction is all of El Paso County, to include incorporated. However, the actual operating jurisdiction is the unincorporated portions of El Paso County.
So if something occurs within the city, do you pretty much leave that to Colorado Springs Police?
Yes, we do.
How did you become involved in, or did you become involved in the investigation into Gannon Stauch's disappearance?
Yes, it was January 28th of 2020. I was working within the division and actually contacted by Detective Sergeant Jake Abensham. Detective Sergeant Abensham had let me know that there was some information that had come in about a missing child, and provided me with the initial brief on that.
So as far as chain of command purposes, so we understand that, where did Detective Sergeant Abensham fit in that chain of command?
So Detective Sergeant Abinshan actually fell under a different lieutenant, but there were three sergeants at the time within that area, and all three sergeants worked as either on call or communicated concerning different cases that were of interest to the investigations division.
What was your role in that investigation?
Initially, on January 28th, after I received the initial brief, I contacted Detective Sergeant Hubble because there were some concerning pieces of that brief to me, and I asked Detective Sergeant Hubble, who was the major crimes or violent crimes sergeant at the time, to begin the investigation and assign detectives.
When you are briefed on something, does that inform how you act as an investigator or how you use resources as an investigator?
It does.
So what were you briefed on from Detective Sergeant Hubble that was of concern to you and influenced how you proceeded from that point forward?
Sure. Detective Sergeant Abinshan had briefed me that on the 27th patrol, EPSO patrol had responded on a missing child. As we dug a little bit further into it, he said that the child hadn't shown up at a friend's house. He didn't have a history of running away. He was 11 years old, and he took medication for ADHD, and that he was lightly clothed. So a number of those points were concerning to me, especially the age of the child, as well as the fact that he was going from point A to point B and did not show up. I didn't understand why initially it was reported as a missing or as a runaway child. And so I asked Detective Sergeant Hubble to assign detectives to it.
What was it about having a missing child was causing you some concern or confusion?
Not knowing or knowing that such a young child who did not have resources such as money, a phone, any of those things was out there, and that he did not show up at a specific place. That was concerning to me because we didn't know the circumstances behind the reported runaway or missing child.
As the lieutenant in violent crimes, did you at some point basically assume overall command to designate resources going whichever direction were necessary at any given time?
I did. So my role and responsibility really is a high level overseeing of the investigation. The main parts of the work that's being done are being done by detectives and being overseen by a supervisor or group of supervisors working in tandem.
Give the jury a sense of the scope of this investigation as far as, especially in these early days, how many people were involved in it in a general sense, and if other agencies got involved very early on.
Sure. Initially, 2 detectives were assigned to gather the initial information because, again, we didn't know what this case was. So as those detectives began investigating, getting information, the scope of the investigation began to grow. And really the resources that are placed towards an investigation can expand or contract based upon the information that we receive. In this particular instance, at any given point, the scope grew to include our entire investigations division, all of our detectives, and I would have to look back at how many that was exactly, and including our detective supervisors. So the entire investigations division were pouring their resources to include crime analysts into the investigation. Early on, we began speaking with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the supervisory agents at the FBI because, again, not knowing what we had, this investigation could have been anything from a missing person to an abduction to any number of things, or even a runaway. But within the first week, probably day 5 or so, we had been in contact with the FBI and requested resources from the FBI.
Were there also even people from the DA's office that were involved in that investigation, from investigators and even attorneys?
Absolutely. So when we got to a point where where we believe that there may be some criminality to the case. We did request some investigative as well as attorney resources from the DA's office.
You mentioned that in the course of an investigation, investigative resources can either expand or contract. What determines whether that expansion of resource use expands or detracts, or retracts, I should say?
So the investigation itself, the number of leads that we have to apply resources to, the depth of the investigation, and the complexity of the investigation. So it could be anything from we have 100 leads to 1,000 leads, and so we have to start assigning the priority leads to detectives. So that can very quickly take resources from an investigation. The depth is also very important. If there is technology involved, if there is video or other things that need to be recovered, that takes time.
In your experience, both as a detective and then in more of a command level responsibility, can you give the jury a sense of how this investigation compares in scope to any other investigation you've ever done?
This is the largest in scope, depth, and time, focused time, I should say, that I have ever been involved in.
Were there area searches conducted in the early stages of this investigation to potentially locate a missing or lost child?
Yes, there were multiple.
Can you tell the jury just some of those things?
Yeah, so as we gathered information as to possible whereabouts of Gannon, we applied resources to that. Those resources actually were done in an incident command structure. So Lieutenant John Sarkeesian was asked to head the search efforts in conjunction with multiple resources from our office and around the community. Another lieutenant that was working with me at the time, Lieutenant David Manzanilla, was tasked with being the liaison between the investigative and the search function. We searched multiple areas within El Paso County, whether it be within lakes. I'm sorry, excuse me. Try that again. Whether it be near areas of water, whether it be near areas up north, and also areas down south. We had multiple search teams out working that for many, many weeks.
Let's start initial stages of the investigation. Were the searches conducted around Gannon's home in that Lorson Ranch area, and was that the primary focus early on?
They were. So with a missing child or a runaway child, initially patrol will do an initial look at the house itself and search for the child. We found missing children hiding within houses nearby at other people's houses. So initial area searches are very, very important. I do know that there was an area search done around the area to include the new construction areas of that Lorson Ranch neighborhood.
Was the focus in that area looking in those fields and ponds and that kind of thing, was that largely determined based off of information that the defendant in this case was being giving to investigators?
Some of it was generalized searches as well.
As expansion of search areas grows, including we just heard from Lieutenant Sarkeesian about the S-curve up in northern El Paso, southern Douglas County. How were those areas developed and why were search efforts being given in those other areas?
So that area in particular was a lead that was produced based upon technological information that was provided or that was developed to believe that the defendant was in that area.
Okay. Initial stages of this investigation. So we've heard testimony already that the initial call comes in on January 27th, Monday evening, and then you get notified on January 28th. In those initial stages, was foul play necessarily even suspected?
No, not at all. At this point, we just knew that there was a missing child.
As the investigation advanced, did it become more focused on the defendant in this case?
Over time, yes, it did.
Okay. Were you able to observe, and we've already heard testimony from Detective Bethel about her interview that she conducted of the defendant on January 29th. Did you observe that in that interview?
I observed a portion of the interview, yes.
The person that was being interviewed in that interview, did you have contact with that person?
I did have contact with the defendant.
Tell the jury about your contact with that, with the defendant.
So during that interview, the defendant had made multiple statements that were not congruent with previous statements that she had made to deputies. That caused some concern. I do know that in that particular interview, detectives had been trying to get the defendant in for interview for nearly 24 hours or more, so we could gather some additional information. It was very difficult to get the defendant into to contact with our detectives. In this particular case, as the interview was coming to a close, the defendant had said that she was done with the interview, that she would come back at a later date or later time or a later date, and then she wanted to leave. I had some concern because I did note that she had been utilizing a cell phone, and I also knew that at the time she had been in contact with Al, her current husband at the time, and that there were multiple text messages back and forth, or there was communication back and forth, I should say. With the knowledge that the defendant was very difficult to get a hold of, the knowledge that she was probably the last person that we knew of to have seen Gannon, and with the knowledge that there was conflicting stories, and that she had essentially false reported, saying one thing to patrol deputies, another thing to our detectives, that was of significant concern. Knowing that, I made contact with her, and as I was talking to her, I asked if the phone in her hand was her phone, and if I could see it. She kind of held her hand out a little bit, and I took a hold of the phone and I seized that phone.
So I want to, first of all, ask you, do you see that same person here in the courtroom today?
I do. It is the defendant.
So be more specific, point, and describe clothing.
You bet. The defendant sitting between her two attorneys. She has dark hair, wearing white with a dark pattern.
At this time, I'd ask that the record reflect he's identified the defendant.
The record will so reflect. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. So you mentioned having two different versions being described, one to patrol and then one to detectives. Were these two different versions almost diametrically opposed to each other? Meaning the first one is missing / runaway kid, and then the second one, as we saw in Detective Bethel, is a rape and an abduction.
Absolutely, yes.
Did that cause you some concern?
Yes, because that is not a normal thing to see that kind of a difference in accounts.
Talk to us about, in your experience as a detective, a person that's been in law enforcement for quite a number of years. If you decide that you need to detain somebody or detain a piece of evidence pending a search warrant, what is in your mind to make those decisions, and why do you do it that way?
Sure. So with this phone in particular, as I had mentioned before, I knew that the defendant was extremely difficult to get in for interview. We did not really know where the defendant was, and was unable to locate her easily. We did know that she had these diametrically different accounts, which was, in my mind, somewhat indicative of a suspicious behavior. We knew that she was in contact with Al Stauch on a cellular device, and we also knew that device was within her current possession. I knew that if she had left with that cell phone at that point in time, it was highly likely that she had the opportunity to destroy any information on there, delete. maybe even get rid of the entire device completely. And I took the opportunity and I said, well, I took a look at that and I said, this was an exigent circumstance. So at that point, the phone was seized.
Okay. So in your experience as both a detective and in your command level experience that you've got now, have you found over time that it's sometimes common to find evidence of crimes on people's cell phones?
Yes, cell phones are often used both to track information, to track locations, to search for information as well.
Do you find that in today's day and age that people take their cell phones almost everywhere they go?
Yes.
Were those things playing into your mind as to why this particular cell phone might be important to seize? That exigency, potentially getting rid of the phone, and the fact that it's likely that there might be something helpful towards the investigation on this device.
Absolutely, yes.
Your Honor, may I approach with People's Exhibit 223?
You may.
Commander, if you could just take a moment and examine that item and let me know when you're done looking at it.
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize that item?
I do.
What do you recognize it as?
This is a cellular telephone. It appears to be an iPhone with a white face, a teal case, and it appears that this is the same device that I had seized from the defendant.
And what about the evidence sticker? Does any of that tell you that information as well?
The evidence sticker is showing for this case 2020-00001382, item number 26, barcode 1153747. This was submitted by Detective Williams, and it does show iPhone with teal and black case.
Does this appear to be the same cell phone that you seized from the defendant on that January 29th date?
It does.
Does it appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition today as the day that you seized it?
It does.
There's also just above the phone in that plastic display, a little card. Tell us what that is.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So yes, it appears to be a SIM card, and my assumption is that is a SIM card from the cellular device.
Is it very common to have a SIM card that actually plugs into each cell phone to allow it to operate?
Yes.
At this time, I'd move for admission of People's 223.
No objection.
Exhibit 223 will be admitted. Go ahead.
When a cell phone is seized like that, what happens to it from an investigative standpoint?
The cell phone at that point is either powered down or placed in a Faraday bag, so it cannot be tampered with remotely. And then subsequently, in this particular instance, since there was not a search warrant to seize and search the phone, detectives would have applied for a warrant based upon probable cause to search the cellular device. I'm looking for digital evidence.
So let's back up and just unpack that a little bit. You mentioned a Faraday bag. We may not all know what a Faraday bag is, so please describe that.
That actually is a device or a bag where we can put a device into that blocks any cellular waves, signals.
So to prevent somebody from accessing it through cellular
Correct.
access points.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that there was not a search warrant yet obtained on this particular phone. Did somebody actually do that after the phone was seized?
Yes, I do believe it was done.
As it relates to this investigation, was that eventually submitted to somebody that can download the data from that particular phone?
That is correct. Yes.
All right. And we've already had testimony on that from a different detective earlier. There were a number of searches of 6627 Mandan Drive. Can you tell the jury why there were such a number of searches in this particular case?
In general reasons, please remember that when this investigation began, the investigation began as a runaway child. As we developed further information, we became more convinced that the runaway portion of this was inaccurate or a flat out lie. We believe that now we were looking at either a missing person or some sort of criminality to this case. Each and every time that we connected and searched the residence on Mandan Drive was prompted by an additional piece of information that, as we were going through the investigation, we uncovered. As nice as it would be to have all the information up front, it's not always plausible. And in fact, we didn't even know if we had a child that was alive or not as we were moving through the investigation. There were suspicions, but it's not like it's a television show where we can complete it in 48 minutes.
Okay. So were you familiar with searches being conducted on January 27th when patrol does their initial walkthrough after the 911 call and the non-emergency call was made by the defendant?
Yes, that's a common thing by our patrol officers looking for a missing child or a runaway child.
And then subsequent searches occurring on January 28th, January 29th, February 3rd, February 5th, February 13th, February 21st, and February 28th.
Yes.
At some point, did it become apparent that foul play had occurred inside the house?
Yes, it did.
When do you remember when that was?
I believe that I mean we had suspicions because, again, without a body, we were not 100% certain initially, and then as we were looking and completing investigations, the leads took us in multiple directions. But all of our information from each individual search, we would gather a piece of evidence, take a look at it, and say, hey, there's something else going on here. So it led us back to the house. I believe on February 7th was the date that we applied for a warrant to actually seize the residence and hold the residence for 14 days the first time, and then we did a second warrant that held the residence for another 14 days because we were continuing to investigate, and every lead that we uncovered brought us back to a piece of that house.
So can you explain for the jury why there's the call for service on January 27th, and then that warrant to seize the residence occurs on February 7th, as you just testified to? Why that gap in time? Why wasn't it initially locked down the very first day?
So I would each of the teams that went out again as the investigation was unfolding. The teams initially went out looking for for a runaway child. Then there was a concern that the child was missing, endangered, that there may be foul play involved. And so every time that we went out, there were different pieces of evidence that we were looking for. Right around February 5th, if I'm not mistaken, there was indication that there was bloodstaining that was within the bedroom of Gannon, and that we actually conducted a bloodstain pattern analysis on that date. On the 7th, we seized and locked down the house because we kept finding that with additional interviews, with items of evidence that were being processed, which ended up becoming voluminous, that this residence needed to be locked down and held.
Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Find a reasonable breaking point in the next 5 minutes or so.
Now it's fine if you'd like, Judge.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right, Mr. Allen?
Thank you, Ron. So where we had last left off, Commander Malhalka, was we were talking about the different searches of the 6627 Mandan Drive. Think you've testified that on February 7th is when the scene was officially locked down. I mean, what does that mean when you lock down a scene?
So at that point, detectives changed the locks on the residence. They disabled the garage door, so they wouldn't be able, no one would be able to access the residence from the garage, and we secured the house that way.
How many homicide scenes have you responded to in your career, both as a detective and now as in leadership?
Quite a few. I can say well into 30s or more.
Okay. In your experience as a detective and in command, if you have a homicide with no body, does that create some difficulties in an investigation?
Absolutely, it does.
In what way?
Oh, without a no body homicide, it's very difficult to present probable cause that a homicide occurred. And so for the investigators, it takes a lot more time and effort to show beyond or to show a magistrate that there is probable cause that the death of someone occurred.
Um, Could there be a reasonable explanation that the person is just missing and not actually dead unless you have a body?
That is a possibility. So that's one of the hurdles in a no body homicide investigation that you have to overcome, because it could just be someone that was missing. Period.
In your experience, both as a detective and then in command level, is there a lot of evidence that you can derive from a body that's had some violence carried out on it?
Yes, there's obviously physical evidence, the method of death, potentially a generalized timeline, and depending upon what evidence is found on scene, that could produce multiple leads.
When you respond out to a homicide scene and a body is still on scene, is it very typical to find bodily fluids on the scene,
It is distinctly possible, yes.
like blood?
Mhm.
You have to say yes or no for the court report.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Potentially body tissue even.
Yes.
Are those things helpful to drive where an investigation goes and how it develops?
Yes, it does help us with determining method, and dependent upon the scene, that evidence can also help lead us to potential directions and suspects.
Did you, in fact, ever go to 6627 Main Dan Drive yourself?
I did.
Did you see things inside that house that led you to believe, based on your training and experience, that something violent had occurred inside that home?
Yes, I did.
What were those things?
We saw blood patterning, blood stain patterning, blood staining within the room of Gannon Stauch.
When you say blood patterning, are you talking about blood stain pattern?
Yes.
Where was that generally located?
On a wall, and I don't remember which direction of the wall, but on a wall that was near where Gannon's bed was previously located.
Did you also have a chance to observe where blood had seeped through carpet and puddled onto the concrete underfloor?
Yes, I did.
Did it appear that there had been a fairly large amount of blood that had seeped through that and stained that floor?
Yes, it appeared that there was a significant event there.
Having that sort of seeping through and puddling, is that consistent with other murder scenes that you've been on?
Yes.
In an ideal world, if you know that a crime has been committed inside of a house, do you prefer to seize that and prevent people from going into a scene right at the very get-go?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because anyone moving in or out may inadvertently move evidence around or transfer pieces of evidence from one place to another.
So we've already talked about the phone call coming in on January 27th, and then the scene is not locked down until February 7th. So we're talking a number of days. Did you have concerns with that span of time from a command level and from your experience about that scene being compromised at all?
From the time as the investigation unfolded, I believe that the investigative teams were acting appropriately and searching for the evidence that was necessary. But as additional information came to light, that caused us to have to go back. So as of February 7th, we determined and realized that the scene itself needed to be locked down, which is what we did.
As this case developed and days after days rolled along, did it become less likely that Gannon was going to show up alive?
Yes.
Were you developing investigative leads that were acted on and evidence being found, like on the S-curve, like we heard from Lieutenant Sarkeesian?
Yes, and please remember, I mean, this was a team of investigators that was not only following leads that were generated with the defendant as a potential suspect, but we had hundreds, if not 1,000+ tips that detectives also had to vet and determine if there was direction that we need to take on those as well.
During the pendency of the investigation phase of this particular case, were there daily meetings starting with the sheriff's office, and then did that evolve eventually to the FBI's building?
Yes, those meetings were sometimes once, sometimes twice per day.
Were a lot of people involved in those meetings?
The key investigators, again, at the same time, we still had investigators in the field, but the key investigators were there, and most of the information was disseminated that same day to the rest of the team. Yes.
And then was information that was passed along in those meetings acted on each day by different investigative teams, both locally and then eventually nationally?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier you had concerns about the defendant's behavior, and that sort of informed you as to why you wanted to seize her phone on January 29th. In your experience and training, was she cooperating with the investigation?
No.
Was she acting as a typical parent or step-parent would in a missing kid case?
Definitely not.
When we're talking about was she acting normal based on your training and experience, did you have the opportunity to observe her at different times?
I did. Mainly during interview. And so during the interview on the 29th of January was the first time that I actually was able to observe the defendant. And then I did observe some of her interactions with media. And we were also very closely monitoring social media at the same time.
Okay, and so when I am asking you questions like, was she acting normal compared to other missing kid cases, was she acting in a way that caused you any concern during the times that you could observe her, that she was not sane?
That she was not sane?
Right,
No.
that she was insane.
No.
Did it ever get anywhere close to that in the observation periods that you had of her?
No, what it appeared to me was, as the information developed, it appeared to me that the defendant was very cognizant of what was occurring and took specific steps, almost being methodical in misdirecting and redirecting investigative efforts.
Did those efforts, in fact, cause the investigation to be manipulated, especially early on, away from the crime scene?
Absolutely, yes.
You have just a moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Cross-examination,
Thank you.
Mr. Pope.
Commander, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Will Cook, and I'm sure you can tell by now I represent Ms. Stauch. So this was originally a missing child, and or originally was a possible runaway, but then became a missing child.
Correct.
What day or what time was that where this switch took place from runaway to a missing child?
I couldn't give you the exact date and time. It would be within the first couple of days officially. It went from a runaway to a missing, endangered.
And did you make that determination to?
I did.
Okay. Now, we watched several hours of Detective Bethel and the other detective interviewing Miss Stauch and saw the incident where the phone is seized by you, and we saw that on video. When you say she held it out, did you ask for the phone or did you just grab it from her?
I believe that I had asked her if that was her phone and if I could see it. She held it out slightly. I took control of it, and at that point, she clasped her hand around it, and I did physically take it from her,
Okay.
yes.
And this was on January 29th, 2020?
Yes,
Okay. Sometime in the afternoon?
yes,
Okay. And this was at the, just right across the street from the courthouse?
yes, sir.
The command, what is that building referred to?
It's
The
called the
headquarters?
Office of the Sheriff, or commonly known as OTS. It's at 27 East Vermoho Avenue.
Okay. And during the interview, you had been watching some of this interview going on in a different room?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And you had been doing some other things as well
Uh,
while the interview was going on?
Yes,
It looked like at one point, you said in your report that you had been talking to Sergeant Rocky Hubble and doing some other things and would come back and look in and see what was going on. Would that
That's
be
correct.
a fair statement? Okay.
generally from a lieutenant level, that is something that as I'm being briefed either by detectives or sergeants, I would be multitasking during an interview like that.
Okay. So Gannon, just kind of a timeline as far as you know, January 27th, 2020, Gannon is reported missing or run away by Miss Stauch in the evening, correct?
Yes.
Okay. On the 28th of January of that year, Gannon's father comes back into town and there is a meeting at a Starbucks in the evening between Miss Stauch and Al Stauch, Gannon's father.
I'm unclear as to the exact timeline on that, so I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fine. But then the 29th, we've already talked about. That's when she went down and did the video recorded interview and her phone was seized. And then on February the 7th is when the seizure of the home at Mandan Drive took place.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, from the 29th to the 7th, which is when she did the interview, to the 7th, that's about what, 8 or 9 days that went by between the seizure of the phone and the seizure of the house?
Have you done the math on that?
29, 30. I'm not very good at it, but I think 8 or 9 days.
Okay.
But would you say from the January 29th to February 7th, there's 8 or 9 days between the seizure of the phone at the police or the deputy's station where you took it from her to where the house at Mandan Drive was seized?
Yes, and multiple warrants executed at the house as well.
Okay. And you already told Mr. Allen, while it's important to have a crime scene or a possible crime scene locked down because evidence can disappear, it can be tainted, it can be destroyed, contaminated, all these other things. Is that correct?
There's a possibility of that, yes.
And that's why you seized the phone you testified to, because she could have destroyed the evidence, gotten rid of the phone, whatever. A lot of stuff could happen. And so that's why it was important, exigent circumstances, that you took this phone, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And ultimately, that's why you seized the house on February 7th, to keep evidence from leaving, disappearing, spoiling, whatever you want to call it.
Once it was determined that the house was a point that we kept coming back to, and realized that the investigative efforts were very complex and were ongoing and continuing, yes, that decision was made.
Okay. Now, on January 27th or 29th, I'm sorry, during the interview, you made a determination that there was exigent circumstances to take the phone, to seize it from Ms. Stauch, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You also based that determination on the fact that she had really changed her story. And as Mr. Allen asked you, first story was diametrically opposed to what second story was, correct?
Yes.
Okay. At that time, you could have arrested her for attempt to influence a public servant, correct? Giving the vastly diametrically opposed stories to law enforcement.
Remember, at this point in time, we also had no body, and there was concern that there were additional leads coming in. So there was a possibility that was a concern, yes.
Okay. Enough to where you were able to seize a phone of Miss Stauch into the possible investigation of Gannon's disappearance.
Correct.
And I'm not talking about, charging her with murder at the time. I'm talking about attempt to influence a public servants.
Sure.
Why didn't you charge her then? You said in your report that we believed she was giving false information. I believed that this went into the calculus about making your decision of seizing the phone. Why didn't you just go ahead and charge her with something then and arrest her?
What would that have gained for the actual investigation into Gannon at that point?
Well, it would. I can't answer the questions.
Okay.
So, I mean, if that's just a rhetorical question for the jury. So,
More of a clarifying question as to where you're going with that. I would like to help you with that.
well, Commander, there's information that after the 29th, but before the house was locked down on the February 7th, that Miss Stauch and her family had arrived at the Mandan Drive house with a moving van and moved out of the residence, correct?
I don't remember the exact dates, but there was a timeline in there that they did move, yes.
It was between her interview on January 29th and but after that, but before the house was seized on February 7th, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And also there's allegations and evidence that has come in that actually Miss Stauch, after January 29th, after the interview and the phone seizure, transported Gannon's body to Florida and dumped it in a swampy area. That happened after January 29th, but before February 7th, the house being seized, correct?
Not sure exactly when that occurred, but again, I would have to actually go back to reports to see the exact timeline. I apologize, I'm not able to give a more clear answer on that. If you're telling me that is what your understanding is, I could agree to that likely be the case.
If she had been arrested on January 29th at the police station when the phone was seized, then she would have been in custody and not had the opportunity the first week of February to dispose of Gannon's body in Florida, correct?
I can't make that determination, especially within our jurisdiction. A false reporting is actually a misdemeanor crime, which you would be served a summons, and so she would never been arrested and placed into custody. If there was enough information for a felony attempt to influence, that is a very low bond and generally something that people are out on extremely quickly.
But attempt to influence, this would have qualified, and it is a felony offense. And she could have had a bond set much higher if it was an attempt to influence as part of a high-profile murder investigation. You could have asked for a higher bond, correct?
Again, I believe that at this point in time, you're making an assumption that on January 29th, we were able to prove or have more than a suspicion that Gannon was murdered by his stepmother. So I think that's reaching.
All right. Can I have just a second, Your Honor?
You may, go ahead.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Redirect.
So just to be clear, did you seize the defendant's phone?
I did.
I'm kidding. To make an arrest in a felony case, what do you have to have?
Probable cause.
What does probable cause mean?
Probable cause is a set of circumstances that would lead a reasonable magistrate or judge, or even to believe that a crime has occurred and the person that you're arresting committed that crime.
Can you arrest somebody on mere suspicion?
No,
Can you arrest somebody just because a child is missing?
no,
Did you have probable cause on January 29th to arrest the defendant?
no.
When a arrest warrant was issued in early March of 2020, is that when probable cause had been achieved and an arrest warrant issued?
Yes,
Did that unfortunately not prevent Gannon's remains from being transported from Colorado to Pensacola, Florida?
unfortunately, it did not.
The fact that Gannon's remains were found 1,300 miles away from Colorado Springs, was that indicative of a very calculated move by whoever moved Gannon's remains from here to there?
I believe it was.
Requiring driving on lots of roads and following laws.
Absolutely, and ensuring that the transport of a human body was concealed extremely well from anyone who may have had contact with that person.
In the fact that, were you familiar with the location where Gannon's remains were ultimately found?
I wasn't personally familiar with it, but yes, I do know where it occurred.
Okay. The fact that his body was found thrown over the edge of a bridge, is that also indicative of somebody trying to hide valuable evidence in a homicide investigation?
Especially 1,300 miles from the reported missing location, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Do any of the jurors have any questions for Commander Mahal? All right, Commander, you may step down. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Prosecution, call you next witness, please. Oh,
Alyssa Beresford, Your Honor. Just put it right there. Just yet.
ma'am, would you step forward, please, and raise your right hand? You swear affirm the testimony about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
So if that's seat in the witness stand, please watch your step as you step into the stand.
And Judge, just as a preliminary matter, before we get into Ms. Beresford's testimony, we have quite a number of photos that we're going to be admitting through her. It's basically 528 through 678. And to be efficient, I've asked defense if they will stipulate to admission of those items so that we can just jump into her testimony. So I would move for admission of 528 through that last number, which was
678.
678. Thank you.
That's
That's fine, Your Honor.
all right.
No objection to
Exhibits
stipulating that.
Exhibits 528 through 678 will be admitted. Go ahead.
And just before I get into the testimony, I want to put these photos up here on the.
That's fine. That's all of them.
There are some from a different witness in here,
That's,
but those get really slippery in these sleeves if I take them out of here.
no, that's fine. Okay.
Good morning. Good morning, ma'am. How are you doing?
Good morning, Your Mom.
Will you please introduce yourself to our jury and then spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
My name is Alyssa Beresford. B as in boy, E as in Edward, R-R-I-E, S as in Sam, F as in Frank, O-R-D.
Ms. Beresford, what do you do for a living?
I am a senior crime scene investigator and the technical unit lead for the crime scene unit for the Colorado Springs Metro Crime Lab.
What does a senior crime scene investigator do?
A senior crime scene investigator has all of the same duties as a regular crime scene investigator, only we have the opportunity to also study and practice an additional forensic discipline.
What education do you have that allows you to do your job?
I have a bachelor's in chemistry with a criminalistics concentration from the Metropolitan State University of Denver. Upon being hired, I completed an internal training program where I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 6 months. During that time, I responded to everything: crime scenes, vehicles, autopsies, person processings, all with a qualified crime scene investigator. And in addition to that, I have had the opportunity to attend several training classes in topics like crime scene investigation, shooting incident documentation, and bloodstain pattern analysis.
Do you have any professional affiliations?
Yes, I am a member of several forensic associations, to include the International Association of Identification, otherwise known as the IAI, and the International Association for Bloodstain Pattern Analysts.
Do you also participate in continuing education to make sure you stay sharp and abreast of any new developments in technology or training?
I do.
Tell the jury about some of that stuff.
Over the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to attend a couple of conferences put on by these associations. So I attended the International Association for Identification Conference, as well as the International Association for Bloodstain Pattern Analyst Conference, which is really a good opportunity for kind of a meeting of the minds, because a lot of people will bring research and new emerging technology and present it at these conferences.
Have you testified as a court qualified expert witness?
I have
How many times?
20 times.
In what disciplines have you testified as an expert?
Crime scene investigation, crime scene processing, evidence collection, trajectory documentation, and bloodstain pattern analysis.
In what jurisdictions?
The fourth judicial,
So El Paso and have you also done Teller County or just El Paso County?
just El Paso.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I would move to qualify Ms. Beresford as an expert witness in bloodstain pattern analysis pursuant to her qualifications.
Defense,
No objection.
witness will be so qualified. Go ahead.
I want to lay some groundwork through you so that we have some understanding as to what we're talking about. Do you typically use Blue Star in your crime scene processing and development of bloodstain pattern analysis?
It's not used very often in bloodstain pattern analysis, but we do use it frequently when we have an indication that the bloodstains may have been cleaned up, because it is a search tool for those latent or hidden bloodstains.
Does latent just mean hidden?
Yes.
Okay. Do you use low light photography when you're using Blue Star?
Yes,
Are you familiar with the phrase road mapping technique?
I am.
What does that mean?
Road mapping is a technique used to document bloodstains, especially when a bloodstain pattern analysis may be conducted later on down the line. What it entails is a lot of extra documentation. We're going to identify specific pattern types for those bloodstains, and then add in a lot more directionality and scales when we're doing the documentation itself.
When you say pattern types, what do we mean by that?
So bloodstain pattern analysis is based off of a series of different pattern types. And what I mean by that is different mechanisms can produce different appearing bloodstains. And based upon the appearance of those bloodstains, the size, shape, location, distribution, orientation, it can tell me different things about what may have caused those bloodstains to be deposited.
Okay. And so tell the jury about, I guess, some of those different types. For instance, a transfer blood stain. What does that mean?
So a transfer stain is going to be when a bloody object comes into contact with an object that does not have blood on it, therefore transferring that blood from one thing to another.
So if somebody had blood on their hand and touched the table and wiped it, would that be a transfer stain?
Correct.
What about expirated blood stain pattern?
So expiration refers to blood in an airway. It is indicative, or you can tell that it's expiration if there are air bubbles within the blood, if there is maybe a little bit of extra liquid to it, like spit, saliva, maybe nasal mucus. But you have to have an injury to the airway in order to classify it as an expiration stain.
So correct me in my terminology here, but if there's like an arterial bleed where blood is spurting, what kind of stain would that potentially cause?
That would be a spurt stain.
Okay, so tell the jury about that.
So arterial or arteries are very unique because they're very pressurized and they're very high volume of blood, which means that if an artery is nicked or severed, we're going to have a very high volume of blood that's ejected under pressure. So this is going to create a very unique blood stain. Typically, what we're seeing are very large circular or elliptical stains with a lot of volume in them.
If somebody has a heavily bleeding head wound and is laying, say, on the floor here, and it's seeping onto the floor, what kind of stain would that be?
Depending upon the surface of the floor, it would either be a blood pool where the blood is just flowing out and it's only gravity is acting upon it. Or if it's a porous surface like carpet, it's going to be a saturation stain. So if you think of you've got a spill on your counter and you take a paper towel and wipe it up, and that liquid seeps into the paper towel, that's saturating the paper towel.
Can you have both a saturation stain and a pooling stain in one single event?
Yes,
Meaning that blood seeped, saturated through carpet and then seeped into a pool area.
correct.
How useful is bloodstain pattern analysis in a criminal investigation?
Bloodstain pattern analysis is typically used when we don't know what happened. Because there's information that can be gained from bloodstain patterns, we typically employ it when we need to know what the story was, or if what our witnesses are telling us doesn't match up to what we're seeing on scene. Bloodstain pattern analysis can be used to determine what kind of mechanisms created the bloodstain patterns, maybe a sequence of events, or even the location of that blood source or injury within the scene.
What about, can you, to determine to some level the amount of energy used that caused a blood pattern to exist?
Not necessarily in degrees of velocity or force.
Okay. What are some limitations with bloodstain pattern analysis?
Well, we can only work with what we see in front of us. So if all of the bloodstain patterns aren't there, then we won't have the full picture and we won't be able to tell the full story. Some other limitations are mostly documentation, in the sense of if we don't have good photographs, if we don't have good diagramming, then for an analyst, it's going to be very difficult to try and go through all of that and make determinations. On top of that, depending upon what investigative question is trying to be answered, we may want DNA analysis to be done on those bloodstains so that we can link the pattern or mechanism with an individual.
When you are looking at a potential bloodstain pattern for analysis, can you sometimes see that there's been some effort to clean a particular area, potentially clean bloodstain patterns?
Yes.
What do you see when you're, that tells you those types of things?
In most cases, it just doesn't make sense. But the blood itself, once it's dried, is actually very hard to clean up. It doesn't just wipe up very easily. And so that blood becomes more dilute, more transparent, lighter in color as you attempt to clean it up. And the well-defined edges of those bloodstain patterns start to blur. So that's an indication that it's been altered in some form.
If, say, we're talking about a wall and there's a high volume of blood on a wall, and then water or some cleaning agent is added to that blood stain, will that cause the blood stain to actually run down the wall?
It can.
Can it cause it to run behind light sockets or switches or anything like that?
Absolutely.
Can it cause it to eventually pool on a flat surface below that particular wall?
If enough liquid is applied, yes.
Can you actually sometimes see any wiping marks or what would appear to be wipe marks on blood stains?
You can, yes.
Are there any other things that can sort of go along those same ideas of indicative of cleaning a bloodstain pattern?
Not necessarily. That I think
Okay.
pretty much covers it.
And it wasn't a trick question. I just truly didn't know. You talked about in the limitations portion of it that if information is missing, does cleaning a blood scene remove information that would have been helpful if it had existed at the time that you show up?
Absolutely.
I want to talk specifically now about the case that you're here testifying on. How did you become involved in the investigation into Gannon Stauch's disappearance?
I was initially requested to respond on February 3rd to the El Palmar Youth Sports Complex to investigate a potential clandestine grave.
So the El Palmar Youth Sports Complex down south, not too far from the sheriff's office, correct? I mean, the jail, I should say.
Correct.
Is it typical to respond to those types of scenes if you don't know where a body might be?
Yes.
Did it turn out whether this clandestine grave was associated with this case or not associated?
It was not associated
So how do you know that?
because it ended up just being a pile of dirt.
Okay. And then what else did you do? Did you get request to go out to the actual home on February 5th?
Yes.
What was the nature of that request?
I was requested to respond and document visible bloodstains that were found within the residence.
And what was the address of that residence?
6627 Mandan Drive.
Tell the jury, you don't just jump in and start going crazy, do you?
No.
So tell the jury what the process is when you first arrive at a scene like at this 6627 Mandan Drive.
Whenever we respond to process a scene, we are always going to get some sort of briefing from the detectives or law enforcement personnel present on scene. That's going to kind of give us some information, maybe what we're looking for. They have, at that point, hopefully conducted interviews, so there may be some critical pieces of information. Once we've gotten our briefing, we're going to conduct a walkthrough where all we're doing is getting our bearings, looking through the scene, kind of developing our plan of attack on how we're going to process the scene. After that, we're going to process the scene from the exterior, moving inwards, using the least intrusive methods and going more intrusive as we progress throughout the scene processing.
So when you say least intrusive to more intrusive, is that basically you start out with a wide aperture and then you really get tight focus as you start to get into specific things that are of importance?
In some cases, yes.
Okay. So what was the focus of your processing on February 5th?
February 5th, I was solely focused on the southeast basement bedroom and the visible bloodstains located within.
And we've already got the photos up there and admitted, again, a big number of items, 528 through 678 in the binder sitting in front of you. Did you take all of those photos?
Probably.
I think I could have saved us some time. Are those all photos taken of the scene that you processed on February 5th of 2020?
Yes.
Okay. Did the bloodstain pattern that you were examining on that particular day include two walls, baseboards, and floor area?
Yes.
Which general walls are we talking about for your processing on February 5th?
The south and the east walls in the southeast corner of the room.
Okay. Do you somehow label the different areas so that you can keep track of which areas you're talking about or taking photographs of to document them?
Yes.
How do you do that?
In this case, I chose to label all of the stains found on the walls under the identifier of A. So every stain was A1, A2, all the way up to 854. And then the baseboards had the identifier of B, and I had B1 through B5.
And then did you also, and so do you do that with a placard? Do you actually put a placard of placard A on certain surfaces, placard B on certain surfaces?
Yes,
Did you also have a placard C?
I did.
What was placard C?
Placard C was a potential blood stain that was located on the window screen in the room.
Okay. When you're processing a scene like this, is it typical that you might also take swabs of different samples?
Absolutely.
Why do you do that?
We will take swabs so that when we're documenting it, and if they're, then later on down the line, we can say, hey, this stain was this person.
Okay. How do you do that swab process?
Depending upon the size of the stain, we're either going to use one or two basically Q-tips. We're going to wet it with distilled water and rub it against the surface to pick up the substance. We'll then package it in its own packaging, and it moves on down the line until it's submitted into evidence.
Those Q-tips that you're referencing, are they sealed before you use them?
Yes.
Why is that?
We want them to be sterile. That way we're not introducing any additional potential contamination.
And then once you get done collecting a swab, so you rub it on a particular surface or stain, do you seal them again so that they also can't be contaminated after the fact?
Yes,
Did you swab any particular areas in this particular case?
I did.
How many different swabs did you take?
I collected 10 swabs.
Did you use that same exact process you just described?
I did.
And then did you actually submit those into evidence for subsequent lab testing if necessary?
I did.
What were your impressions of this particular scene?
When I first walked in, I couldn't see any of the bloodstains. It wasn't until we got pretty close to the wall, and we were really looking for them that we found them. And after we had identified them, which it took about an hour and a half to go through and identify all of those tiny little bloodstains, it definitely was not a static event. There was something dynamic that happened there, more than just a single event within that room.
What do you mean by that?
I've been to crime scenes with a single gunshot wound that has no blood. I've been to crime scenes with a few stab wounds that have no blood. To have blood at that scale and of those types of patterns, there has to be some movement within that scene. So some object with blood, whether it's the blood source itself, impact events, or a bloody object being swung, was present within that room.
Would it be helpful for you to explain what you're talking about, to put a particular photo up on the screen so the jury can see sort of what you're describing? And I'm going to rely on your expertise to tell me which one would be best to help describe what you just talked about.
Sure. Have we seen photographs of the wall prior to labels?
Not with labels, no.
Not with labels, okay. Let's go with People's Exhibit 540.
Okay. Give us just a minute to scroll through to that number. And permission to publish, Judge, as I see fit during the testimony of Ms. Beresford. Okay, so we've got 540 on the board behind you. You can either describe what you're looking at in the photo that's on the table in front of you, or if you want to point out things on this wall, use the pointer that should be up there in the witness stand somewhere.
Got it, okay. So this photograph is an overall photograph of the bedroom after all of the stains have been identified. So you can see in this photograph, there's those little black rectangles. Those are each going to identify a minimum of one spatter stain. And by spatter stain, I mean a circular or elliptical stain that is produced by some external force being applied to liquid blood, whether that's on a surface or from an injury itself. So this kind of shows the magnitude of those spatter stains. It reached fairly far. We have a height of 5 to 6 feet tall, and it spanned on the, I believe that's the east wall, at least 6 feet down the wall. So this isn't just one area. There's some movement involved with this.
So let's dig into this photo just a little bit. There's the white on that, I'm sorry, the yellow that stretches through both walls on that south and then east wall as well.
Yes.
What is that yellow stuff there?
That is road mapping tape. So that is part of our road mapping documentation. And that allows a bloodstain pattern analyst to look at a stain, reference the scale tape and say this stain was approximately 5 feet high.
Are all of the blood stains that you looked at for this particular case, with the exception of the window, all contained below and with inside of that yellow border road mapping tape?
There is one additional stain that is, if I may I
Yeah.
stand?
Absolutely. Just make sure when you stand up, because you're away from the microphone, that the furthest juror can hear you.
So there is a stain that is just past the reaches of the scale tape, and it's going to be on the baseboard, kind of over here on the lower left-hand corner of the photograph.
And I'm going to have you stay there for just a moment. All of those white rectangular stickers, are those your evidence stickers that you placed that are below and inside of that yellow road mapping tape?
Yes.
What about the white things that we see above the road mapping tape?
Those are wall decorations that were there prior to my arrival.
So those have nothing to do with your analysis of this scene, correct? Okay. You mentioned the height and I'm going to use the word enormity. Did that surprise you for this particular scene?
It did.
Why?
At that point, we really had no indication of what the cause of death could be. So something like this is a lot more, for lack of a better word, violent than I expected to see.
Did this indicate to you that there had been a significant bloodletting that occurred in this bedroom?
Yes.
Did these stains lend themselves to one pattern? We talked about the other patterns earlier. Did these lend to one pattern, or were there multiple different patterns potentially?
So because of the cleaning that was involved, we really couldn't say that it was from a specific pattern. If you think of a photograph, which is made up of a lot of tiny little pixels, right? If you have all of the pixels together, you can see what the picture is and what it means. If you only have 50 pixels and they're randomly spread across a photograph, you're not going to be able to tell what may actually be in that photo.
Were there some of these blood stains that showed potentially different directionality?
Yes.
Can you show us a couple of examples of that, just so that we understand what you're talking about? And then again, just tell me which exhibit number would be best for you to point to for that.
Exhibit 572.
Okay, so let's publish 572. Okay, so we've got 572 displayed on the screen behind you. And again, if it's might be best to just stand up and point to different things so that the jury can see what it is you're talking about. What is it that we're looking at in 572?
So in this photograph, there are 3 or 4 tiny little spatter stains. So these are going to be this one here down at the bottom. We have 2 near the scale sticker and then 1 a little bit farther out. Now for spatter stains, especially elliptical spatter stains, we can usually tell directionality based off of what we call the tail. So as blood hits a surface, it's going to elongate, and then kind of what's left over is going to create what looks like a tail, and that's going to tell us the direction it was moving. In this specific photograph, we have a couple of different directionalities. So this lower stain is going to have a downward directionality. You can see it comes to a point there at the bottom of the stain. That's going to be the tail. This stain up here closest to the scale sticker has an upward directionality, and it's upward from left to right. And we can tell that by the tail that's at the upper corner of the stain.
When we have these types of photographs and bloodstain patterns existing in a scene where there's different directionalities, what does that tell you as an expert in bloodstain pattern analysis?
That tells me that there's probably more than one event that's happening to produce these stains.
Was there evidence in this particular scene that there had been efforts to clean up the blood staining that was on the walls and baseboard?
Yes.
Can you point us to some photographs in those photos that are in front of you that will help us understand what you mean by that?
Um, 586.
Okay, so we're going to put 586 on the board behind you. Okay, so just for orientation purposes, this is the power outlet that's lower, closer to the floor on that east wall in Gannon's bedroom.
Correct.
All right, so what are we looking at here that shows you there's some indication that cleaning had occurred in this bedroom?
So there's actually two things within this photograph. The first, we can see a visible blood stain right here in the center. The edges of this stain are very blurred, meaning it's not well defined. It's been altered in some way. So it's probably been cleaned. At the same time, we have this line here, kind of in between the socket and the sticker scale, that is a diluted blood stain. If you think of when you're moving your furniture after you've been walking around for a while and all of a sudden you realize how dirty your carpet is because you're looking at the nice clean carpet versus the dirty carpet, same theory. We have the section of wall that was covered by the plate that is clean, and the line that defines that diluted blood stain right next to it.
Is there also some potential blood staining sort of on that outlet in the screw area that would hold the plate on there in that picture as well?
There is.
Does that also potentially lead to a conclusion that cleaning had occurred?
Yes.
Okay. The well, first of all, we can see texture of the wall here, correct?
Yes.
Is the walls, both the south and the east wall, similarly textured as what we see in people's 586?
Yes.
Were the majority of the blood spots or stains in the recesses of that wall texture?
That's hard to say. There actually was a fair amount of stains that were on the top of the surface, but there were some that were caught within the crevices.
Okay. Some point, did you go back out to this particular scene with a person by the name of Tom Griffin?
I did.
What was that for?
Mr. Griffin was doing a bloodstain pattern analysis on this case and wanted to examine the bloodstains further. So I went out to assist with his examination and any further documentation that he required.
Do you know whether or not he actually prepared and submitted an expert report in this case?
I do.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach with People's Exhibit 679?
You may.
Show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 679. I'm going to rely on your intuition here. Can you tell what People's Exhibit 679 is?
Yes.
How can you tell that?
Based upon the barcode label that I prepared and attached to this packaging.
Is this an item that you actually seized or collected while you were out there on February 5th, I think it was?
No, this is not.
I'm sorry, what date was it that you collected that item?
I collected this on February 13th.
February 13th, thank you. Is this a sheet that was collected?
It is.
A sheet from where?
This was a bed sheet that was collected from the bedroom closet in the southeast basement bedroom.
Is this the same bedroom that we've been talking about?
Yes.
Why did you collect that sheet?
We were given an indication that there was shark print bed sheets, that we were missing the set, and so it was something that was important. And so we found the bed sheet within the laundry basket and collected it.
Subsequent to the time that you collected this item, has that bag or evidence collection bag been opened by somebody else?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Based upon the additional evidence seals, I can see that it's been opened a couple of times.
Okay. To know that the item that's inside that bag is the same item that you collected back on that date in February, would you need to open that bag?
Yes.
Okay. There are some plastic gloves to your right, and there should be scissors there as well.
It is going to my own gloves because those are going to be extremely large.
Is that the bed sheet that you collected on that date?
Yes,
Is it in the same or substantially the same condition today as the day that you collected it?
it is.
And at this time, I'd move for admission of People's Exhibit 679.
Defense?
No objection.
Exhibit 679 will be admitted. Go ahead.
And so, was the purpose of collecting this item just to compare it to potentially other bedding that may be found at a later date, or what was the purpose?
That would be a question better asked for the detectives.
Okay.
I collected it for anything that needed to be done in the future.
Okay, so a detective just says, hey, get that, and you do it.
Yes.
Okay. Can I have just a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
One final thing, did you find any shell casings in that bedroom?
No,
Did you find any knife or sharp objects that could have been used to stab somebody?
no.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Cook.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Good.
I think we've met before several times in the last few months, so good to see you again. I just have a couple questions for you. So your testimony to Mr. Allen was that from the staining, the blood pattern, that you think that this was a very violent event?
Yes.
Okay. And actually that it was multiple events?
Correct.
What do you mean by multiple events? I think I know what you mean, but maybe the jury doesn't. What do you mean by that?
Multiple events could be multiple blunt force impacts. It could mean, in this case, different mechanisms. The bloodstains that we saw were indicative of everything from a gunshot wound to blunt force and sharp force injuries.
Multiple events could have been a shooting and multiple stab wounds with the
Could.
knife. Okay. And also, in addition to being very violent, multiple events, that the blood was coming from different directions.
Correct.
Just all coming from one way. It was,
Yes.
you said you had the head and the tail facing one way, the head and the tail facing another way with another stain. So it was coming from everywhere.
From different directions, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Redirect.
I don't think I have anything, Your Honor.
Do any of the jurors have any questions for Ms. Beresford? All right, looks like we have one. If you would retrieve that, Mr. Allen, and counsel approach, please. Ms. Beresford, we're not sure if this is a question that is right for you or for a different witness. So I'm going to ask it. Does anything about the blood-stain patterns at the crime scene suggest a chronological order of events?
So because a lot of information was cleaned away, we really couldn't, or I couldn't tell a chronological order for any of it.
All right, I will allow reasonable follow-up as to that question only. Prosecution.
Only just that the bloodstain patterns that you were seeing were consistent with all those different mechanisms, either a gunshot, a knife or sharp force, or blunt force,
Correct.
or combination of any of those three.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Cook.
Thank
Right.
you.
Ms. Beresford, you may step down. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.